Okay, thank you, Jane. Now we'll go back to our slideshow of our pilgrimage that we took to Egypt. And it should be, okay, right here. And I've got to move this a little bit to be able to start the slideshow. Okay, hooray, we're in. So, Christina, where was this picture taken? Which monastery?
I will look in my phone and I will send you
Okay.
in the chat. I don't remember off the top of my head.
It's very representative of just about every place that we went, isn't it?
Yeah. Am I muted or can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear, President.
Yeah, we're gonna have noise, a little bit of noise in the background. But I was just gonna say that Christina said she can look and see. I was amazed at how many of these monasteries we went to, and they were all so incredibly similar. They all had the same thick surrounding walls, the low little door to enter into it, the one low door to enter into the monastery, the tower, the little windows. They really did all look so incredibly much alike.
Yes.
So I'm not surprised we don't know which one this is.
Let's say just a couple of general things. So in Egypt, about 90% of the population are Muslim. And so the 10% that are not is still 17 million people that are Coptic Orthodox. Just about all of the Christians in Egypt are part of the Coptic Orthodox Church. We understood, that from just from our interactions with Coptic Orthodox in this country, that there's so much that we share with them, and but still there was so much about their life, particularly in Egypt, that we don't know, that we didn't know until we went. And one of the things that we learned right away is what it's like to be a minority Christian body in a larger Muslim country. And certainly so much of what we experienced about the vitality of the Christian life in Egypt is related to the fact that they're a persecuted church to this day. And I think you're going to get that message really clear as we go forward. But let me move on to, this was a shot that, Anastasia, is that you, or no, that's Alexis who took this shot, this selfie,
That's
right?
Alexis.
That's your twin sister. And I'm not, are we still in, I think we're still in JFK in this picture.
Alexis. So I have an identical twin. My name's Anastasia. In front of you in the very front of that photo is Alexis. And Audrey also on this call. We're all sisters. So it was really fun to go together. Alexis is the OCF Real Break student leader. And so she was the student representative on the team that set this trip up and really got us to go to Egypt. So she couldn't be here tonight, but she really enjoyed doing that work.
Oh, there you are, Anastasia, right above her head too.
Yeah, literally right above her head. We took that. There were 11 Minnesotans to go together on this trip out of the 26 students. And so that was at the airport before we all took off from Minneapolis to fly to JFK to meet up.
Okay. Oh, this was just the group in Minneapolis. Thank you. I wasn't quite certain. Yeah. So altogether, we had 26 students, almost half of them being from Minnesota. I'd say maybe the majority of them were from the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese, but from other Orthodox jurisdictions in this country. We had one Armenian Orthodox, and then we had a couple of people on as a part of the staff, Coptic Orthodox, who were essential to this trip. There's no way we could have done it without Peter and Ida, his sister. So here we are in Alexandria. Looks to me, it reminded me so much of Thessaloniki, of other places. But let's just say a little bit about what we did the first day. So we had, what was it, 11 and a half, 12-hour flight? Something like that. And through the night, so we landed at 5:40 in the morning, and our day was starting. Very few of us had a full night's sleep. So the first day was a little bit challenging, a little bit rough. We waited for our bags and then got onto a bus, and we had a 3-hour ride from Cairo, where we landed at the airport, to enter the city of Alexandria. We learned an awful lot about Alexandria while we were there, but this is one of the most beautiful and populated cities of Egypt. And once again, let's see if I can get it to move. So this is a picture that I added that was out the window from the restaurant. So the first thing that we did was go to have a beautiful seafood lunch do you remember the name of the restaurant? Does anyone? Christina?
I don't think we ever knew.
Okay.
But out the window there, is that not where the lighthouse of Alexandria stood?
Yes, that's,
yeah.
Thank you for pointing that out, Presbytera. So the ruins that are kind of maybe 2/3 of the way over to the right are the location where that the original, one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world, man-made wonders of the world, the great lighthouse of Alexandria stood. Alexandria being a city that was mapped out and planned by Alexander the Great when he spent 8 months or so while he was in Alexandria, and it's still, up until very recent times, has had a very strong Greek influence in the city.
Yeah. And just to state the obvious, that's the Mediterranean Sea, of course.
Thank you.
Just sometimes, people wonder, what water is that? Well, that's the Mediterranean.
And I want to just include another quick picture of, so another thing that we visited the very first day in our, I won't say exhaustion, but in not being completely awake and alert, we walked around the library that stands on the location of the ancient famous Library of Alexandria, learned the history of that ancient library, but also got to see this amazing library that's 14 floors, but they're not floors one right after another. They're more like plateaus that are floors that one leads into the other. So from this picture, you can see how the stairs go up to one level and to the next level of the library. Anybody want to say anything else about that library? It was a pretty cool place.
I found a copy of Metropolitan Kalisos Ware's book in German on one of the shelves.
It was interesting to see all the library shelves had books in all different languages, just one lined right up next to the other by subject matter. There's so much to say about that building if you're really into architecture and modern architecture and all of it. Not that it kind of washed by me. I'm not super interested in all of that, but they did have bids all around the world of architects to build this building. And I think it was a group from Finland. Am I right? The Netherlands, maybe. Yeah. That won the bid, and someone was describing some of the architectural features to us. And it really was mind blowing, because you can look at something and totally not see the intent, and then when someone points it out to you, you can't unsee it, so that was really interesting, truly. So, but that was day one,
And the furnishings for the library came from all over the world, and that was really a fascinating thing too.
Yeah.
How many countries of the world participated in this?
Yeah. Didn't the US give all the wood for the floors? Is that accurate?
All that wood is this country's contribution.
Right, because wood is not, there's not an abundance of wood in Egypt. So a lot of the wood in a lot of the buildings, it was pointed out to us that it was brought in or a gift from some other country.
And the reason that it was not like us, they designed it as kind of circular and on many levels, had something to do with, was it about learning, like different levels of learning? Am I remembering that correctly, everybody?
It was a circle, but that was not quite completed. It was like it had a wedge out because it was supposed to be about all of the knowledge that could be known, but that there's always some more that is we can't know. Like no one person can know everything. And so there's like a bit of the circle that's incomplete, which was very cool. And
Very
they had that
interesting.
bridge that went out into the out into the water and really was supposed to represent like going out into all the cultures and all the knowledge of the rest of the world, which was very cool.
Right, right.
So, I
But it
mean,
was
we could-
also interesting to be in a library that there was still a very strong sense of the prevalence of the Quran in Islam, and that was kind of like one of the focal points in a way. Is the very large display, seeing passages of the Quran that were in the library.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
our first day, we ended up checking into the Al Muntaza Hotel. I don't think we have a picture of that. This is where we went for our second day, but it was wonderful to arrive at a very comfortable hotel. And most everybody had a room that either looked out the back onto like a pool, and I had a picture of that, or looked to the front. And we actually got to go outside a little bit at the end of the stay, which was nice. Dinner had comp line right off of the back of Presbyter and I's room, with everyone gathered around. We said it kind of quietly because, again, we're in a Muslim country, and you could hear the call to prayer happening around us. And we knew that we were, a pretty small minority there. So we gathered around and prayed all together outside, but in a kind of secluded area. And then woke up the next morning to explore Alexandria on the Feast of the Ascension. So our journey took us to the Church of the Annunciation, the Greek Orthodox Church of the Annunciation, to celebrate the Feast of the Ascension.
We were at Saint Sava's monastery for liturgy, and then we went to
Oh,
Annunciation
that's right.
afterwards. Yeah.
That's right. Thank you. Yeah, I knew there was something wrong in that. So we tried contacting the Patriarch of Alexandria. This is the Eastern Orthodox Church who we're in communion with. There are maybe 170,000 in all of Egypt of people who are Eastern Orthodox, as opposed to in the Coptic Orthodox Church. That's what the numbers that we were told. But we weren't successful to hear back from him, so we had no idea if we were going to be able to see him. We've had an audience, but we just went to the church, the monastery of Saint Sava, which was going to be open. And when we walked in the door of the church, which you see in these pictures, lo and behold, the patriarch himself was sitting on the throne, and there were about 4 other people in the church, 3 or 4 other people, and that was all. And then, a couple of clergy in the altar. He was not expecting this, but when we walked in, it was, for him, it was a miracle that God allowed to happen. And we quickly filled in a lot of the church with all of us, as you can see in the picture. And that began this wonderful and amazing kind of first day that we had, first full day on our pilgrimage. Christine, you want to talk a little bit about St. Catherine and how she was there right from the beginning?
Yeah, so another one of our unexpected blessings, of course, when we first decided we wanted to go to Egypt, we immediately explored the possibility of going to Mount Sinai, to St. Catherine's Monastery. St. Catherine is the patron saint for OCF because she's a patron for students, and because, she stood up to the philosophies of her day. And so she's someone that we pray to for our students to have strength in their studies, and to have wisdom and knowledge that's directed towards God, but also to be able to stand up against whatever they face today. And we were told very quickly by every authority possible that just the realities are right now that to travel from Cairo to Sinai is just really not safe. It's a very long bus ride, and it goes through a more dangerous area. And Sinai, even coming from the Holy Land, is it's a little bit of a dicey experience from what Father Theodore shared with me. So, we kind of had to let go of our hope that we were going to see St. Catherine on this trip to Egypt, where she's from. But as with many things, God provided a way anyway. So we finished liturgy and we followed Patriarch Theodore over to coffee. And then offhandedly in coffee hour, either he or one of the other clergy who were with him mentioned, oh yeah, by the way, we have the pillar on which St. Catherine was beheaded. And we all just looked at him like, what? You have the what? And we're
the lower right-hand picture.
Yes.
You see my pointer? Does
Yes,
everybody see it?
I think we can all see the pointer. Yeah.
Okay.
And we said, you have to take us right now, take us back over there. And so Metropolitan Pandalemon, who I'm sure you'll share about in a minute, took us back over to the church and showed us that we had just stood in liturgy that, for an hour and a half, 2 hours, right beside this pillar, and had no idea that we were standing right there with St. Catherine's, blessing and presence on our trip already.
So 2 things we were hoping were going to happen. We didn't know if we'd make any
Excuse me a
connection with St.
second.
Catherine or the Patriarch. And
Excuse
lo and
me.
behold-
Cristo
Yes.
needs to say good night.
Okay.
Say good night, Papu.
Good night, Papu.
See you
Good night,
tomorrow.
Krista.
See you tomorrow.
I can't
Okay.
wait. I
I'll
can't wait.
I'll be back.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
See you now. Bye-bye. So we sang the hymn to St. Catherine, and we all had a chance to venerate her icon, but there was so much else to venerate in this what the Patriarch described to us as the oldest monastery in Alexandria. So going back to the 300s, well, let's say something about the Patriarch first. We had heard a lot about him, but I think even all of the amazing things that we heard about him didn't quite prepare us to experience a hierarch like this, who he just welcomed us with his look and his gaze, and immediately he started, telling everybody who was doing the service to change things to accommodate us, and that makes sense when you think about he's not really there, although he's in Egypt, and the ancient Patriarchate of Alexandria. The Patriarchate of Alexandria also is over all of the Orthodox Church that's in Africa. So most of his flock are in other countries than Egypt. And he is very mindful of things like language and what language to use. The deacon that we had, whose name was also Theodore, so that was a little joke and a surprise that the Patriarch noted right away, is that the deacon was Theodore, the visiting priest was Theodore, and the Patriarch was Theodore II. But the deacon was from the Congo, right? Is that where was it the Congo, or was that where the Metropolitan?
That's right.
He was from Congo. And the Patriarch even said that he's the hope of the church in Congo. Do we have a picture of him in here? I don't see a picture of him. But here's the Patriarch.
He's coming out of the altar in the bottom liturgy picture. It's not very good, but he's there.
Yes, right over there. Okay, great. So we didn't expect to necessarily have to do very much anything else there besides go to the liturgy. And instead we ended up having an audience with the Patriarchate, where he took us into this beautiful room, fed us chocolates and gave us all something to drink. And you can tell that he didn't have a whole lot of time, but he still made the time to be with us. Then he started singing the hymn for the resurrection, which we had just stopped singing because it was the Ascension, but it still was, I think he chose it because he knew that would be one that we could all sing along with him. And we moved from that room to the stairs and took a group picture with him while we were still kind of chanting, and he was telling everybody what to do as we were doing this and talking to us at the same time. And then he turned around and he kind of said his, farewell, goodbye, auf Wiedersehen, and he was off just like that. But we stayed at the monastery, and you can see in the other pictures here various other things that we were able saints, great saints of the church that were from Alexandria, and that at some point in their life had been there. So we venerated the remains not only of the relics of Saint Athanasius, the Great of Alexandria, but also a couple of the contemporary saints that were for a time in Alexandria. Saint Nicephorus, the leper, which was a surprise to us, unless we knew his life well, and Saint Nectarius, of course. And then we got to go and tour the Annunciation, which is not just the church, but the main portion of the Patriarchate that exists in Alexandria, the buildings where in the 1950s, there were 500,000 Greek-speaking Orthodox Christians still in Alexandria itself. And the Patriarch told us they're down to 82. So it's really quite remarkable what's happened over the last 70 years. And it's been particular political things that have happened that the Greeks that were kind of a thriving community there are no longer there. But we're not going to go into that too much more right now. Anybody want to share anything else about being at St. Sava's, going and seeing Annunciation? We
I
have
think
an, you have-
Annunciation's on the next slide.
Oh, okay, good. That's what we'll do. Yeah, so here's the Church of the Annunciation, Evangelismos. The person who's holding the cat right in the middle was for many of the students, he was definitely the highlight of the day, if not one of their takeaways for the whole week. Metropolitan Damianos, right? No, Pandalemon, Metropolitan Pandalemon. He told us how it was that he ended up coming in to live and to work in the church in Alexandria and in Egypt, and to work for the Patriarchate. At one point, he ended up being the bishop in Congo, and he told us a fascinating story about having to minister, amongst others, to the pygmy, the pygmy population that lives there. And he shared with us his shock and surprise that even amongst all of these pygmy people who were cut off from the world in so many ways, some of the people amongst the pygmies had names of these ancient Greek like philosophers, right? I forget which names of the people that he mentioned, but he shared with us in an almost very offhand way, just that it's not easy to do missionary work in these countries, and that he himself there were 2 or 3 attempts on his life while he was there and doing that work in the Congo. He seems to wear 100 hats around the Patriarchate. So, but he was our tour guide for the rest of that morning at the sites of the Eastern Orthodox Patriarchate of Alexandria, before we then left there to go and visit the catacombs. Anybody want to share anything else about our experience there? Oh, the icon of Saint Nectarius that we have right here, that was quite moving. Does anybody want to share about seeing where Saint Nectarius stayed, and also where he would hear confessions, and what the Metropolitan had to say about that? Okay, I'm not looking at everybody, so I'm just going to continue to talk unless somebody interjects.
I will, but I wish one of the students would, if they would. I'm going to count down to 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 5, 4, 3. Yay, good job.
Okay. Well, I don't have anything to say about St. Nectarios necessarily, but what was really special about Metropolitan Pantalemon was we talk a lot about like having a childlike innocence, and he so offhandedly was like, oh yeah, like they tried to murder me at some points, and like, he like so offhandedly was like, there were these really dramatic events that had happened in his life. But juxtaposed to that, he's carrying like his little kitten and he's all excited to be talking to us. And he very much had that childlike innocence that we all strive for. It was definitely a testament to, I think, what a lot of the saints, what we see and the joy they feel, and people who go through really incredible experiences that we can't even imagine, and still like using those to fuel their love of Christ and the joy they feel and the peace they feel on earth. It was incredible to experience.
And we said to each other too, another kind of takeaway was, you can't judge a book by its cover. Like when he first walked into the liturgy over at St. Sava's, he came in a little bit late compared to everyone else, and we only arrived at the singing of the Trisagion hymn. And so for a metropolitan with a short beard like this and just his kalamafki on, I thought he was just a priest. And he was kind of well dressed too, you know. And so to me, he looked like somebody who was a little bit more maybe on the worldly side of things, and you know, and that can be, clergy can be along those lines. And then once he started talking to us and telling us about all the work that, you know, the responsibilities that he has, and we started seeing these various, you know, gifts of his, it just kind of showed me once again how, you know, first impressions can often be really, really off, you know. So I was standing there, if you remember in the previous picture, next to the patriarch. He had put me, you know, and that's normally where another hierarch would stand, or maybe the abbot of the monastery would stand, or something like this, in kind of a position of honor. And I'm really feeling like I'm sticking out, but happy that he was letting us say the Lord's Prayer in English, to say the Creed in English, and these things. And then when Metropolitan Van Leemon came in, he kind of called him over, and then he had the Metropolitan come around behind the throne and come up to me on the other side, and he basically came up to me, he said, "So who are you?" You know, like what are you doing here? And I was able to share with him a little bit more about who we were. And yeah, at that moment, you know, I just for me, there was this sense of, are things going to work out the way that we wanted them to? And after our, you know, our time with the patriarch and with the Metropolitan, I just had that sense, like I've had so many other pilgrims before, like somebody else is in control. The Lord is directing all of this. The saints, the Apostle Mark, Saint Athanasius, Saint Nectarius, they were arranging all of these things for us. We didn't need to worry. Saint Catherine, she had our backs, and it was going to be a wonderful trip. And that's exactly what happened, right? Every single thing that we did, we had our itinerary, but what we ended up doing and seeing was so much more than we could have ever hoped for or thought about. Moving on, we're still in day one, and we is this still pictures from? Oh no,
This is the Church of St. Mark,
which was also there in Alexandria, but this is the first Coptic Orthodox church that we visited. Peter, you want to say anything? Or is he still cooking dinner about St. Mark's?
Yeah, I could chime in. Hi, everybody. I'm the guy in the picture with Christina there. This is the place of the ancient Patriarchate of Alexandria. It's built over the house of St. Mark, or sorry, the house of St. Ennianus, who was the first convert to Christianity in Egypt. He was a simple shoemaker, and St. Mark, as he entered Egypt to preach to the Egyptian people, he was fixing a shoe, and the needle that he was using to fix the shoe went through his hand, and so he screamed out, "Oh, the one God." And so St. Mark took this as an opportunity to preach God to him, and he and his family were the first who were baptized, and then he actually became the second patriarch of Alexandria after St. Mark left. And so his home became the first church, and this church stands on top of that exact place. And right next door, where Christine and I are, is the place of the ancient school of Alexandria, also, where St. Clement of Alexandria, Origen, Basil the Great, Saint Gregory of Nyssa. All of these big names would have studied together. Yeah. Also, my parents got married here, which is great.
Yeah, that was so wonderful. And Peter, down below, the bottom right hand, this was kind of our first encounter with like the new martyrs. When we say new martyrs, you know, we think of people maybe over the last 500 years or during the Turkish occupation or something, you know, within the Greek experience. But when the Copts say new martyrs, they mean like people in the last 15 years.
Yes. In 2017, a man strapped with a vest, explosive vest, ran into the church. He got through. So outside of every church in Egypt, there are armed forces and security, which has increased a lot more over the last few years, but I think at this time was a bit more lax. He got through the security gate, but I think they were onto him, and so they started chasing him, and he blew himself up. And so you can see, this was on Palm Sunday, actually, during Divine Liturgy for Palm Sunday. So you can see there's a group of new martyrs on the right, 8 of them on the right, and then on the left you can see 7 of the armed forces, all of them Muslims, who are also killed in the explosion trying to protect the church. This was just 2017.
Yeah, yeah. Anybody from that wasn't on the trip wanna at this point share your thoughts about what you're hearing? I'm gonna go out. I'm gonna leave for just a little bit our oops, wait, I went backwards. How do I get back to
Are you trying to stop the, yeah. You can just push escape next time.
I was pushing in and it wasn't escaping. So oh, here we go to stop share. So I just want to open up again to everybody here. So somebody who's just listening in, what are your impressions so far?
I wish I would have on that trip. It's wonderful, everything that's being said. But we never got the answer about Saint Nectarios. It was something you were going to say.
So if you recall in the life of Saint Nectarios, it was actually some of the bishops of Alexandria who, out of a jealousy for his popularity, were able to play upon the very old patriarch who had embraced Saint Nectarios in the beginning and provided his education and brought him to Alexandria from Greece and did everything for him, but convinced the patriarch that he was plotting in a way to take over. The patriarch was already in his 90s, right? Late 80s, 90s, but he was so popular amongst the faithful there that he was able to be convinced, and that led to his being dismissed and then exiled from the patriarchate without explanation, without even, you know, normally if you're in the church, if you go from one place to another as a clergyman in whatever rank of the clergy that you're at, everything's predetermined and it's all with the appropriate ecclesiastical procedure. So because priests just don't go wherever they want and set up shop wherever they want. Everything is with an understanding that each local area is under a particular hierarch and bishop. And here Saint Nectarios was kind of just thrown to the shores of Greece without recommendation as to what he could do and how he could be used. And in the meantime, coming in that way, it made it very suspicious. So we know that all of if you watch the movie Man of God, you know that all of that only led to his acquiring great holiness as he suffered it all without judgment, without speaking about anybody that had done anything wrong. And it's one of the things that made him such a great saint, and he has such great power of intercession you know, in the world today and why so popular in Greece. But Alexandria always was the people who took the rap for for doing that. And even the Metropolitan did say, well, we kind of helped him to become a saint, you know, but maybe not in the way that you would want to be known. So what's happened in the Patriarchate is that they actually, several years ago, the Patriarchate basically wrote a letter of asking a forgiveness of Saint Nectarios. And it was posted within a chapel. We didn't see that in the picture, but it was posted in a chapel where he would hear confessions. So we got to go into a place where Saint Nectarios was hearing confessions and get a sense of how the hierarchy and the Church of Alexandria, in a way, you know, still regrets and feels a sadness for what happened to him from before.
Thank
Anybody
you,
else?
Father.
That was actually really impressive about Metropolitan Pandalemon again. That there was a little picture, it's called the Chapel of Apology now, where he heard confessions, that he said, he didn't just say, oh, you know, those bishops back then, it's kind of their fault he became a saint. He said, we, the bishops, we made him a saint. And I was just really impressed with his willingness to like take the responsibility still
Right.
as a bishop now of that patriarchate, who obviously wasn't even alive when it happened. That was very impressive to me that someone in such high authority is the second in command to the patriarch and still took personal responsibility for the sins of his institution.
Peter, were you going to add something to that, or you just popped up because you finished preparing dinner? Okay, good. I think we'll continue to go with the slideshow. So I'm going to go back into the share mode and get back into our slideshow. And now I go to present. We'll hopefully pick up where we left off. Yes, at St. Mark's. So this pretty much was, in terms of the sites we were going to see on our first full day. I guess it's really our third day of traveling, right? But our first full day of the pilgrimage there. We had lunch. Was that the place where we had the really fun lunch? And where we sang happy birthday to Alexis, even though it wasn't a birthday. That was a little later on. Yeah. We people watched on the coach. Our 26 students were broken down into 5 different groups, right? Of about 5, one group had 6. And so we did our first thing kind of together in our smaller groups together. And that, for me, that personally was like one of the highlights of the first several days, and getting to know the students a little bit better. We decided, instead of to people watch, we wanted to go somewhere where we could just sit down and eat a little something, but we had wonderful conversation amongst ourselves, and started that bonding that was so much a part of the trip as well, with each other, as we shared each other our journeys as Christians in you know, coming to know and to follow Christ. So we did get back to the hotel and we had dinner. So I think I'll move on to the next day, which is when we went to Wadi El Natron. So we saw 4 monasteries in one day, and it was to the west of Alexandria. Am I correct, Peter? Or south of where right? Alexandria, of course, is on the water, so we went south, but it's still, Alexandria is a little bit further west than the other places that we saw, than Cairo, and then Galala and Saint Anthony's, and the desert in the eastern part. So I wanted to show everyone, but when we go out of the slideshow, I'll hold it up again. Alexis, one of the many things that Alexis did was prepare a wonderful book that gave us the life of the various saints that we were seeing, that gave us morning and evening prayers. It gave us lots of pages to meditate on, wonderful quotes of the different saints whom we were visiting there, and just to reflect on all of that. It's a great companion to our whole trip. There are real great journal. So we visited the monastery of Saint Macarius. El Baramos was actually the monastery of Saint, who was it? The second one that we saw.
It's named after Saints Maximus and Domitius, who were two disciples of Saint Macarius, but it's famous for having the relics of Saint Moses the Black and Saint Isidore, his elder.
So do we have in the next picture, Christina, some of that? Should I go to this picture?
Yeah, I think I have a slide for each of the monasteries.
Oh, okay.
Wadi al-Natrun is also the same desert as like Sketis or Skeet. Whenever you're reading the Desert Fathers, I feel like that's important. Like this is it. This is the desert of the Desert Fathers.
So what was really wonderful about that strenuous day was, and it, to me, it was quite hot. We probably did more walking that day than any other day. I mean, maybe even in comparison when we went all the way up to the cave of St. Anthony, 2,500 steps up and back. But is we just met so many people, and each one of these monasteries, we had a guide, one of the monks, and it was just remarkable to be with them as they took us around these ancient monasteries. I had no idea. And in my mind, I wondered what these monasteries were like. If they were still functioning well or something. And then we start arriving at the monasteries. We say, so how many monks are these huge monasteries? How many monks are here? 200, 150, 200, 250. And the monastic life is thriving, is absolutely thriving in Egypt. So I wrote down somewhere, but I couldn't find where I written it. I think it was in my journal, the names of each one of our guides. Does anybody remember this monk right here who took us around St. Macarius?
I just put it in the chat, Father Mercurius.
Oh, thank you, Father Mercurius, that's right. That was our introduction to monasticism at St. Macarius. There's so much. I'm just looking at these pictures. I didn't really prepare, Christina, so I'm going to let you just say what you put in and why.
Sure. So the top left picture is the relics of St. John the Baptist and Elisha the prophet. And what was very cool is that there was a very long oral tradition that these relics were buried somewhere underneath the ancient church dedicated to St. Macarius that I think had elements that were dated. It's currently still the main church of the monks, and it has elements dating back to the 10th century in the current church. And Father Mercurius told us that recently they decided, you know what, let's look for the relics, and they dug it up and they found, they had a little spot you could see under the ground, like a tunnel that had been the reliquary of these, that had the bones in it of St. John the Baptist and Elisha the prophet, which have now been brought up and put in this wooden box up above. And then the next one over from that is not a very great picture, but those are the relics of not only St. Macarius the Great, but St. Macarius of Alexandria and St. Macarius of Jerusalem, all three together, who are often whose intercessions are often invoked in like Coptic prayer as together, the three of them. And then the next one over is relics of the 49 martyrs of help. I have it written down.
Of Sketis, of Shahid.
Of Sketis, yeah. And they were martyred by the Berbers, if I remember correctly. Yeah. And there's a story about I don't remember, the governor or some non-monastic local and his son seeing this martyrdom, and the son and not seeing the crowns of martyrdom being coming down from heaven for these martyrs, and then the two of them also being martyred. And you can't really tell on this icon, but it was very cool that it was painted into it was like only the shadows of the perpetrators, but not their faces, which I thought was there's like all the swords with the blood, and then just the shadows of the soldiers on the right hand side at the bottom.
Is that the right icon? Am I
Yeah,
focusing?
yeah. Do you see the two shadows off to the right that are supposed to be the shadows of
Yeah,
the
right
the
there.
Berbers who had come? So we were able to venerate their relics. And then the last one is the relics of Saint John the Short, who's also another desert father. Then I don't remember what's at the bottom. Oh, we went into a monastic cell at this monastery, a 10th or 12th, I don't remember now, century monastic cell, which was very cool. It was 2 little rooms, one for visitors and your books, and one for sleeping and praying. And that with this little tiny door, so that you had to bend down to remind you of. It reminded me of reading From Iville to Uville, if you've read that with your kids or on your own, of having to like shrink your ego and get smaller to just to go down into the monastic cell. And then Father Theodore, I don't know if you want to share about our walk. There was a path, but Christina didn't see it. Walk into the desert to see Father Matthew. Yeah.
So this grave right here is the grave of a contemporary, very well-known monastic writer named Matthew the Poor. He's probably, I would say, along with Pope Shenouda, that they're probably the 2 most popular Coptic Orthodox for non-Coptic Orthodox people in the world. A prolific writer. When I read his book, Communion of Love, just when I was in the seminary at the time, I was just blown away by it. And that began the esteem that I have now for the Coptic Orthodox Church. In earnest. He wanted to be buried in as simple a way as possible. So this is his grave, this like just not nondescript kind of block of cement on, and you can't see it so much in the picture, but he's buried where a number of other people from the monastery are buried as well. You can see that the pilgrims have come and they've put like wreath of flowers and so forth on his grave. But we read some passages of things that he had said. I use an entire book of his for my class in pastoral care and counseling. So that says a lot about, it's one of the books we read from cover to cover for that class. The grace that he had. But something happened, another one of those things that we just weren't at all thinking about and planning. His grave was a good, I don't know, 500 yards or 1,000 yards from the monastery, outside of the monastery. And all of a sudden we realized, and we were looking around, we're kind of like in the desert now. And you can't really see it from this picture here, but I forget who it was. Was it your idea, Christina? Someone said, now's a good time for us maybe to practice the Jesus prayer a little bit and to be silent and still. So we all went off like the monks where the monastery that Saint Zosima was staying at. I think that was Saint John the Baptist. We all went out into the desert. We said, we're going to take a little time here and try to leave time as much as we could. And everyone went off on their own. So you could see where everybody else was, but you couldn't hear really what anybody else was doing or praying, even if they were praying out loud. And we just stayed there in the desert. And that was another one of the early on when we would have our wrap up at the end of the day, that so many of the people felt something happened in that desert. The Lord just spoke to our hearts. And it was just another moment where we just felt like, wow, this is a holy place. Egypt, this desert is full of, for 2,000 years of monastics going in and praying in this place, and now we're there, right where they were. And
yeah, even at the end of at the end of that day, people were saying, out of that day, how much that was like their takeaway. But even 10 days later, after experiencing all of Alexandria and all of Cairo and all of Galgalala and St. Anthony's and the desert, many people still said that was one of the biggest takeaways of this whole pilgrimage, was that time kind of in the desert. It was unique experience.
so moving on to the next monastery of 4 that we saw that day. Let's see if this.
I would like to say one thing about
Yeah, Brandon, please.
yeah. One of the questions I had for Father Mercurius is what were the oldest hymns in the Coptic rite, and he mentioned the fact that the oldest hymns actually have pagan origins, but they were baptized in a sense, and then they replaced the references that were to Horus and Isis to Christ and the Theotokos. I did actually do a little research about this, and the Egypt Independent talks about this a little bit. It mentions here that the origin of the Golgotha or Calvary hymn sung on Good Friday in the Coptic rite every year is a pharaonic melody that priests prayed as they buried the ancient Egyptian kings. Early Copts familiar with the tune continued using it on Good Friday.
Amazing. So we see again, thank you so much, Braden, for sharing that. We see again how, the gospel didn't spread in a vacuum. It went into a context, and how the early Christians and the apostles and those who came after them, shared the faith. It was to build bridges. It was to go into a culture that could be baptized, but you didn't get rid of everything. You didn't say, oh, well, these hymns, there's nothing good about them that they can't be used. Rather, because they were familiar, the people were familiar, because it was a context that the people already had some sense of a relationship with the divine, the church came and perfected it and reorients it in a way. There's so many other examples of this, but thank you so much, Braden, for sharing that. Yeah, that was so fascinating about the pre-Christian roots in Egypt and the connections for the Old Testament and the New Testament. Here we are. Let's see. It's 8:08. I think we're doing pretty good. We might get to halfway through the trip by the end of this, but we're moving on to Al Baramos. Oops, I went too far. Who remembers our second tour guide here at this monastery dedicated, it was the founders of the monastery,
Joachim.
of Saint Macarius.
Yeah, next week when I'm home, I'll have my journal. I'll be able to reference it. I forgot to bring it with me.
Father Joachim.
Father Joachim.
Yeah.
Christina or Peter, do you want to tell us more about these pictures?
Sure, I can. So as I mentioned, Sketis is like basically the giant desert where a lot of the desert fathers happened. And so you'll find that many of these monasteries are pretty close to each other, about a 20-minute drive, some even just a 5-minute drive. But they're all about an hour and a half to 2 hours removed outside of the city, Alexandria, because that is what these monastics did. The era of persecution was over, and so they wanted to still give their life to Christ, and so they willingly took on the persecution of the desert. They went out and left the city and went into the desert. So as we said, this was the monastery of El Baramos, literally Par Romeos, or of the Romans. And it's named after, the reason it's named that, it's named after 2 brothers who were the sons of a Roman governor somewhere in the Roman Empire, who wanted to leave basically their thrones and pursue Christ. And so they came to the Egyptian desert and became disciples of Saint Macarius the Great in the 4th century. And you can see those wooden etchings there. Saint Macarius is in the middle and the 2 brothers are on either side. And so this is the ancient monastery in the area where they settled. And this is also the area where Saint Moses the Black left his heavy life and came and picked up the light life. You can see there on the left, those are 2 basically almost like life-size coffins or reliquaries, where the body of Saint Moses the Black and the body of Saint Isidore, his teacher, the one who taught him the faith and ministered to him, are both laid next to each other in the ancient church there. Anything to add, anyone?
Yeah, can we talk a little bit about, we're familiar with relics,
Mm.
you know, as Orthodox Christians. Our reliquaries, you know, if it's a really great saint, it's going to be very decorated, often with metal or some, you know,
Mm.
and it opens up, and then you see the remains, whether they're corrupt or incorrupt, but you know, and on the feast days they're taking out, and one of the features that you see within the Eastern Orthodox practice of venerating the relics is how many relics give off their own aroma, or they may even be myrrh streaming, you know, and so you'll be anointed with the myrrh of Saint Demetrius or these other saints on feast days and so forth. But Peter, could you explain a little bit the unique practices of the Coptic Orthodox Church and why you keep your relics kind of in these
Tubes.
almost,
I call them tubes.
like tubes, yeah.
Yeah. So it's two things. I think, and this is more of an assumption, but I think that we took this practice from our ancient Egyptian ancestors, where our relics are put inside of basically sarcophaguses or sarcophagi. And so if you can see there, it's like inside of that velvet or fabric outside that's like adorned with iconography and the embellishments is a wooden tube, basically, and that's where you would keep the relics of the saint. In this case, it would probably be the entire body of the saint wrapped in shroud, and then put inside of this wooden tube and then completely shut. And then the wooden tube outside has a bunch of, you know, embellishments, decoration. And this is similar to if you've ever gone to any museum that had any mummies or anything, you would find that it's the body that's wrapped in shrouds that's then put inside a wooden sarcophagus and then adorned outside, either in fabric or in metals, to honor the person that it's wrapping. So that's typically how we present our relics. It's usually you'll find them in smaller tubes that are about this size, because you'll only get a fragment of the person's body, whereas here, these saints are put in basically like 6-foot tubes, because they're basically the entire saint in there. Another special thing that we do, that I assume we also took from the ancient Egyptians, is that we, on the feast day of a saint, what we do is that we remove that cloth casing, and we apply different perfumes, oils, dried up flowers to the outside. And it has like a very distinct aroma that, Father, you mentioned smells eerily similar to like the myrrh streaming oil that comes off of relics. So typically, during the service, while the glorification hymns are happening, the priest or the bishop will take off that casing, rub down the entire sarcophagus in the oils and the myrrh and the flowers and the spices, similar to what they did basically to the pharaohs and also to the body of Christ. We know that, the myrrh-bearing women brought the sweet-smelling oils and spices to shroud the body. And then all of that is usually wiped off, because it soaks into the wood a little bit, but a lot of it just sits on top. So a lot of it is wiped off, and then they'll, as like a blessing to the people, they'll take a little bit of it and then put it on the back of a little printed icon of that saint and then give it out for people to take home. And so typically people have like hundreds and hundreds of these things over the course of their lifetime. We got like a stack of them at every monastery that we went to, basically. It basically just looks like a little printed paper icon. There you go. There's one from another monastery that we went to.
Yeah, we're gonna see her next.
Yeah, and on the back there's like a brown smudge. You'll see. Yep, there it is. Usually with some tape or adhesive. Yep. So those are basically just the spices and the oils that we use to venerate the body, and then they're given out to the people as a blessing to take home.
Thank you, Peter. Wow.
Mhm.
I'm just so blown away, like the providence of God. It's just like we're on pilgrimage again. I didn't know if anybody was going to be joining us from the team, but I especially wasn't expecting you to come on. your explanations are just adding so much to what, I would fumble along to try to say. Christina, did you have anything else from these pictures that you included?
Well, only maybe that I think at some point it would be cool to talk about like the fortresses. I think that adds to like, again, Egypt being a place of persecution. I mean, even you go all the way back to the Old Testament and the Israelites, but something that was a distinct marker of all the monasteries we went to was that sometime between the 10th and the 12th century, they would have built a fortress inside the monastery.
Did they call them citadel?
Yeah, or a citadel that was connected to, almost always connected to the altar of the main church, which was interesting. I'll tell you why. It had a bridge first that you could go across and then pull up or collapse that would basically shut them in. And inside there would be a chapel or maybe two, and living space, food stores, a well, basically everything that they would need to be under siege by the Berbers for weeks. I mean, one of their guides even said, today persecution, it happens fast, which was like a sad and scary comment, but you can't do anything about it. Someone comes in with a bomb, they come in. But it used to be that, it could have been weeks that you were under siege. And the very cool thing that I thought about them being connected to the altar of the main church was that there was a trap door or like a secret door that would go from the altar to the fortress, so that if an attack happened in the midst of the divine liturgy, they could protect the Eucharist. The priest could escape with the Eucharist directly into the fortress and shut himself in on the other side to protect the body and blood of Christ. And I just found that really moving and impressive, that it wasn't a fortress made only for their own worldly life, but one that they built to protect Christ.
And when we look at it from today, I mean, this seems somewhat odd to us that, our churches, they're just public buildings like most other public buildings, and we walk around feeling pretty safe just about wherever we go. But we think about the history of Christianity in Egypt. First, you had the Persians coming through in the 400s, right? And then, was it the 600s? The 600s, and then
You have the Romans first. You have the Romans. Yeah.
Persecuting the Christians, right? Of course, the first 300 years of the persecution of the Christians. But then maybe most of Egypt, right, embraced Christianity, and then you have the Persians coming through, and then the rise of Islam up until today. So they have been a minority, a persecuted minority faith within their own homeland for almost all of their existence. And then things like citadels and all of this make a lot more sense. Let's move on to our third of the four monasteries. Saint Bashoy is the Coptic manor of Saint Paisius. So Saint Paisius, this is monastery of Saint Paisius the Great. Any one of these monasteries, if we had spent the entire day there, if we had spent a week there, we wouldn't have discovered everything. We wouldn't have felt and learned so much. But I don't know, when we were at this monastery, I was particularly struck, both by our guide and by, so now if I remember correctly, let's see, his name was, I knew it at one point. Do you have it there, Christina?
Osman.
Cosmas, right? Cosmas, Father Cosmas. And each one of them, I think of our four guides, he had the most sense of humor. I mean, certainly our fourth guide is unforgettable, and we'll talk about him. I don't know if we get to it today, but and he was like so many of the monks. He had another profession, right? I mean, many of them come in having but they were successful in their professions, but they're called by Christ, and then they bring kind of that into the monastery. Peter or Christina, tell us what we're looking at.
I think Peter hopped off, but so yeah, Father Cosman was a doctor, and he was still the doctor, I think, for the monastery. He was in charge of medicine and people who spoke English. So he had hoped, I think he said something about having hoped for quiet, and has been listening to all the people.
And other people, he kind of complained that other people have jobs in the monastery where they just can do it for a few hours and then they are free. He never knows when he's going to be called and take this other group around, and or you go here or go there to help with the medicine. And so you could see he was very aware of time, as he took us through the monastery. He's very conscious on how the time that we spent doing what we did.
Yeah, I think that there's so many things that can be said about the life of Saint Paisios, Saint Bashoy. Those are his relics, which are incorrupt on the left. But I think that the main thing I kind of highlighted with the images I shared here was one thing that I thought was so striking about all of these monasteries was they had their main ancient monastic church, and then of course they had many other chapels where they would serve for special feasts of certain saints. But they also had these huge cathedral churches kind of outside the ancient walls of the monastery, but still part of the monastery grounds that were for the people on Sundays. That they would serve. And that was where St. Paisios's relics were. I think the icon at the top is from his ancient church, but then his relics were from in the big church. And everywhere we went, I mean, granted, we were at these monasteries, both here and at St. Damiana's on kind of like the weekend in Egypt, but they were just flooded and full of people the whole time of the faithful, even to the point where there's little villages kind of like they were selling toys at this one cart and they were selling snacks over here that are kind of like around and about the life of the monastery. And I think it was just very moving to see that people, the Christians, this is where they choose to spend their time when they have time off on the weekend. They just come to the monastery to be together.
The symbiotic relationship between the church in the world and the monasteries was profound. It was profound, and you sensed it in just how they did their liturgy, in the churches that we attended, in Cairo or wherever else. Very but that's another thing that is kind of preserved in Egyptian Orthodoxy that is lost on a lot of the Orthodoxy in the West, is this really close connection with the monastery, and that the monasteries were the real, people didn't go to Disneyland. You wanted to break, you went and stayed in a monastery. You went and refreshed yourself spiritually.
And it made for some like unexpected noisiness, but it was really like it was such a blessing to like see that. And vice versa. More than once we had one of the monastics talk to us about their own need to keep up with what's happening in the world, not in like an obsessive following the news way, but I don't remember if it was Father Cosman or one of the other monks who said, well, if people come to me from the world asking my advice, I have to know what it is that they're going through and what is that's going on in the world. There was just a very healthy, out of like sacrificial love relationship between the monastery and the world, and the church in the world and the monastic life that I found very impressive everywhere we went.
I'm very tempted to want to like read the whole life of St. Paisios and kind of end our first half with a little more of a feel for like how we would experience it. So most of these we read on the bus as we were going to these places, but you'd get there and you'd hear their life, and you'd in listening to the life and then walking around the monastery, it makes it come alive. I don't know how else to say that. We can read about them in the Synaxarion and say their hymns on if it falls on a Sunday, or if we go to liturgy on a weekday for this particular saint, and not have much more of a connection. But for these people who live in Egypt, and these are their heroes. These are They know all of these stories. Their children are named after all of these. You know, I think we met more monks with the name of Bashoy than any other name. Saint Paisios the Great, or Saint Bashoy the Great, lived in Egypt. His parents, Christians, distributed generous alms to all the needy. After the death of her husband, his mother, on the suggestion of an angel, gave her young son Paisios to the clergy of the church. The young Paisios loved monastic life and spent his time in one of the Egyptian skeets. Renouncing his own will, he lived under the spiritual guidance of Saint Pombo, finishing all the tasks assigned to him. The elder said that a new monk in particular needs to preserve his sight in order to guard his senses from temptation. Paisios, heeding the instruction, went for 3 years with his eyes cast downwards. The saintly ascetic read spiritual books, and he was known for his ascetic fasting and prayer. At first, he did not eat any food for a week, then 2 weeks. Sometimes after partaking of the holy mysteries, he survived without food for 70 days. I mean, we can't even imagine that, you know, but this is, you know, for those who give themselves to Christ, he is their sustenance. Man doesn't live by bread alone. We live, God sustains us when we commune with him, even in this lifetime. This is what we see in the lives of the saints. St. Paisios went into the Nitrian desert in search of solitude. There he lived in a cave carved out by his own hands. The saint was granted a wondrous vision. The Lord Jesus Christ revealed to him that through his labors, the Nitrian wilderness would become inhabited by ascetics. He asked the Lord where the monks would obtain the necessities of life in the desert. The Lord said that if they would fulfill his commandments, he himself would provide all their necessities and would deliver them from demonic temptations and cunning. In time, a number of monks and laymen gathered around St. Paisios, and a monastery was established. The most important rule of St. Paisios was that no one would do anything by his own will, but in all things would fulfill the will of his elders. I mean, let's just stop there, you know, and think about what makes monasteries, you know, these intensive care centers for the church, but makes them factories for holiness and sanctity. You know, the gospel is that we have to lose ourselves in order to find ourselves. We have to die in order to live. And it's not necessarily through martyrdom, right? The monks give the harder witness or martyrdom of a daily dying to self-will and cultivating this kind of naine avloyimeno, you know, and no matter what's asked of them, they say, may it be blessed. And we just saw it, right? Just like in the monasteries that in Greece or in the Holy Land or wherever else we may have encountered monastics, even here in America in the monasteries, you felt it amongst the monks here as well, that, like you said, Christine, they're still in touch with the world, but they're not living in the world. They're living already a heavenly existence, you know, like the angels. I'm going to stop here because it's 8:29, and but I don't want us to end yet. I want to just have a little conversation about what everyone's heard so far, and maybe a couple of those who were on our trip who haven't shared anything. If you're still with us, you might want to say something else. There's my sister, Alexis. Hi, Lex. There's not many of us left. Braden's in. Oh, I think everybody else has dropped off at this point, and I didn't see any of the messages in the chat.
Yeah, a lot of people were sending chats saying they had to get off.
Okay. All right. Well, then we'll those of us that are left, what are your thoughts? Was this what you expected? Despina, I'm going to call on you, put you on the spot. Our daughter Despina, up in the upper right. It says Kristen because they're on mom's device.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Aunt Alexis. What do I think about it?
Yeah, like what's impressed upon you? Everything what's a takeaway from tonight?
Well, everything. I mean, it was so special to have you guys come straight here when you got back from the trip because it was all fresh in your minds, and I loved hearing about everything. I was interested in like the Coptic orthodoxy, how it kind of compares to, that was interesting to me, and loved hearing like all the things you said about that and how they really are very similar in so many ways. And I loved hearing their traditions. But what struck me this time was definitely what you're saying about the monasteries. And I loved all those points of how important that role is for us. You know, monasteries aren't like just totally separate thing and not for us. You know, we have this relationship, and it seems like they really have that down, you know, how to maximize that relationship there. So I liked hearing about that. It looked beautiful. I liked smelling. That was cool that I could smell what you were talking about.
Actually, she picked up my phone the other day and she said, "Mom, I think your icon of St. Paisios is Mercury."
Fragrance. Like, what's that?
Because I have an icon of St. Paisios in there, and I told her no.
Yeah.
And showed her what it was.
So, yeah, we're a bit noisy over here, so I'm gonna go back
Thank
to
you. I appreciate it.
Theodore.
Yeah, little Theo there. Someone else. So who hasn't said anything tonight? Dimitria, Helen, Sula.
I'll say something. I'm surprised about the monasteries. I know you mentioned in church about the churches, and your introduction about kind of the percentage of Muslims to Christians, you know, what a special place for them to go to feel a part of that world when their day-to-day world, you know, I mean, we live in mostly a Christian society. I've been to Turkey. That I was trying to think about my experience in Turkey, and feeling, I didn't feel, I don't know what the right word is, like a minority or anything, because I was a tourist, right? And I was, you know, we had a tour guide and a couple days there, and there were others, but I have a feeling on your trip, you were not fighting throngs of tourists, right? You must have felt, and then you said you weren't scared or worried, but I mean, the reality is in 2017, you know, something happened. I mean, that to live like that every day and wonder, I mean, I know they don't sit around and worry, I'm sure, but yeah, and was there security at monasteries or not really?
A little bit, but it wasn't overtly present. Christina, you want to add?
No, I think it was mostly strongest in the cities. At the gates of the monasteries, like kind of far out, there would be a kind of like a check sometimes, but it was less present in the monasteries. And I hope that in Father Theodore's series, when you get to the monastery of Saint Simon the Tanner, he can tell you also another place the Christians are living with a little more openness. That was also, I'll tease another striking moment of our trip.
Oh, you're not going to be able to join us next Wednesday night, Christina?
I mean, I'll be here. Daniel won't be. We'll see how I do with all three kids who all gave up on me. We'll see.
I'm so grateful, not just for you, but for everybody. Jordan, thank you so much for joining us. You had a class tonight. Another one of our team members.
No, I had work tonight.
Okay, all right. Another PK, that's B. So maybe we'll have more of the group coming on next Wednesday. But this was part one of our We Are Pilgrims in This World, Egypt, pilgrimage to Egypt. There's so much more that we haven't even begun to touch on yet. So I may even, with the next email that I send, the next invitation that I send out, I may put some more material, some reading materials, maybe to give you a chance to cover a little bit more of some of that before we get back on for the second half. What I'll say is this: as each day went by, we kind of said to ourselves, wow, it couldn't get any better than that, right? Until the next day. And then you're like, wow, this was even more amazing. How did this happen? You know, we weren't anticipating this, right to our very last day. We're on the very one of the last things that we did. We were leaving at we were going to leave at 11 at night, and we're sitting on the Red Sea, and we're having a Bible study. That wasn't one of the most amazing things, but we're having a Bible study on the Red Sea, you know, about the parting of the Red Sea. And then we noticed, like in the distance, would look like a cloud, but it had a funny color, a little bit of a color to it. And we were almost ready to leave. One bus was going to leave then to take people back and then come back for the rest of us a little later. And all of a sudden that cloud's on top of us, and it's a windstorm. And like the number one news feed for that day, like around the world, in no matter whose news you looked at, was this huge windstorm that swept across Egypt. And at the Suez Canal, there was like a mile high like windstorm, and we're in this right by the Red Sea, thinking about when the wind blew the waves back, you know, to allow the people to walk by, you know, dry shod. Everything in our trip was just kind of the hand of God winking at us and saying, thank you for coming, you know, and I want you to know how happy I am that you're here with us. So may you join us. May we be happy to have you join us again next week for part 2. We will record it, and we'll, just like other seasonal series that we've done, we'll share it with everybody. Anybody else have one that hasn't said anything that you want to say something before we close with prayer? Stevie, you
I've
have
totally enjoyed it.
Thanks, Lex. Can you tell we're brother and sister? I know I look like I could be her father, but she's actually
No.
I actually am older than him, so he's my little brother. So
all right.
okay.
So yeah, let's say a closing prayer, and God bless everyone tonight and this week until we gather together again. Thou who at all times and in every hour are worshipped and glorified in heaven and on earth, Christ God, who are long in patience, great in mercy, rich in compassion, who loves the righteous and shows mercy on sinners, who calls all to salvation through the promise of blessings to come. Receive, O Lord, our supplications at this hour. Direct our lives according to your commandments. Sanctify our souls, purify our thoughts, correct our intentions. Deliver us from all sorrow and evil and pain. Surround us with your holy angels, that guided and guarded by their array, we may attain to the unity of the faith, the understanding of your ineffable glory. You are blessed now and always to the ages of ages. Amen. How did we say goodbye in Arabic? And we didn't say goodbye very often, did we? Christina, what would we say like at the end of the night? I don't remember. I remember shukran, thank you.
Yeah. And everyone we were with spoke English, truly. So
Oh, okay.
yeah. So we didn't have to really get too into it.
Inshallah, God willing.
God willing.
Inshallah.
Inshallah, we'll be together again next week. Thank you,
Okay.
everybody, for joining. Jordan,
Okay.
I know you just jumped on right at the end, but one thing about your whole trip.
One thing, a lot of things. I think the thing that I keep pointing out as my highlight was definitely walk up to St. Anthony's Cave at the end. It was just both a very special moment, as well as it really felt like it was connected with my spiritual life and what I've been working on in my spiritual life as well.
So that's wonderful. The little teaser you just got for to come back next.
Yeah.
Next Wednesday. Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.